In this lesson, we will introduce the concept of an outgoing WebRTC endpoint. When using Currento, media flows through a media pipeline, which we created in the previous section. Such pipeline is composed of endpoints. An endpoint is a media element, a functional unit that performs a specific action over media. Currento offers multiple types of endpoints, each one with a different purpose. What we will do today is to create a WebRTC endpoint that will take the media from the user's browsers and inject it into the pipeline to be consumed by other endpoints. We will label this endpoint as outgoing because it will be used to send the media streams of users to other components of the media pipeline. So let's jump into it. First thing we're going to do is add a variable in the upper part for storing the ICE candidates that the server will receive. We will call this variable ICE candidate queue. And initially it will be an empty object. Next, let's create this join room function that we have previously called. Let's do that in here. So create function join room. In here we will receive a couple of parameters. First of all, the socket, which will allow us to keep the connections, the username of the user that we're gonna the username of the user that we're gonna join to the call, the room name, and a callback for when the function is over. So in here, let's call the get room function that we have previously created, just to make sure that the room already exists, and if not, we will create it. So let's also send the socket, the room name, and a callback function. So as a result of calling the callback, we will get the room. So let's create an arrow function. If there is an error, let's return also an error from here. And if everything goes well, let's start working with the room. The first thing we create is a pipeline. So let's call that pipeline, and we're gonna use the create function to create a WebRTC endpoint. This is like this. And in here, let's add another callback function that will receive the outgoing media, which is our endpoint, our outgoing WebRTC endpoint. In here, let's handle if there's any error. So return callback error. And now let's move to the other part of the flow, which is creating the user. So in here, let's initialize a new variable called user, which will contain the ID, that will be the ID of the connection, the name, which will be the username. Let's also store in here the endpoint. And we will also create an empty object for storing the incoming WebRTC endpoints. We will talk about this in a couple of videos. Initially, it will be an empty object. So it may happen in this negotiation process that ICE candidates can be received even before actually creating the endpoint. So that's why we are using an ICE candidate queue. So after creating the endpoint and the user, let's check if there are some ICE candidates already received for these users. So let's get the corresponding queue by creating a new variable ICE candidate queue that will have the value. No, this is not this one. That will have the ID of the user, and if there is such queue, let's process those ICE candidates. So we're going to use a while here to go through all the elements of the queue. Okay, in here we're gonna get the ICE candidate. I'm gonna use shift, and in here user, let's get the outgoing media, call the add ICE candidate, and in here let's process the candidate. Okay, now let's register an event for the outgoing media to search its own ICE candidate. So let's get the outgoing media and let's define an event which will be on ICE candidate. He will use an arrow function or anonymous function, and let's get the actual ICE candidate. For this, we're gonna call currento, then register, then complex types, and then ICE candidates. And in here, let's put the one that we got on the event. Next, we need to send this candidate to the client side of the connection. So we're going to use the socket and the emit function. As you can recall, we are using only one type of message, which is of type message, that is receiving an object with some values. In this case, values are the type of event is candidate, also the user ID, and the actual candidate. Oh, it seems I have a typo here, and I need a comma here. Okay. Another thing we need to do is that every time a new user joins the call, we need to notify all of the users of such thing. So let's use a socket to send a message to room name, and the type of message will be, again, message, and the object will have the event of type new participant arrived. Next, we will send also the user ID and the username. Now, regarding the new user, if there are already users in this room, the new users needs to know about them and be able to negotiate with the endpoints in order to receive their streams. So let's get a list of the existing user and send that list to the new user. We're gonna initialize an array here, existence users. This will be equal to an empty array currently, and we're gonna use a for every object in my room participants. So if it's not the same user, which we will check by the ID, making sure that it's not the same as user ID. Let's add that user of the list to the newly created array. And we will add the ID, which is my room participants. In the position I, we need the ID and also the name. The same, my room participants. In the position I, we need the name. Oh, I think we need some letters in here. Participants, yeah. And I got an extra space here. Okay, I think everything is okay. Now let's send this list of users to the new user. To do so, we will use the socket or connection, and we're gonna emit a new message that will contain the event of type. Let me get rid of that extra B. Existing participants. The list of existing users will be equal to the existing users. Nothing too fancy here. And let's also send the ID that was created for this user. Now, finally, let's add the new user to the participants array. User. In the next lesson, we will handle the two types of messages that we are sending to clients, which are the new participant arrived and existing participants. So when you're ready, move to the next lesson.